Hello, let's continue on with chapter 15, part 2. When I left you last, we had just finished talking about the P wave being atrial depolarization, QRS complex, ventricular depolarization, and the T wave is ventricular repolarization. Now, when you put those activities with the activities of the heart, this is what causes the filling. So initially when you're at the T wave and the whole heart is relaxed, this allows for what's called passive ventricular filling. So as it relaxes, there's a negative pressure inside and all the valves are open, the atrial ventricular valves are open and the blood will go right through into the ventricles. Then the atrium will contract, which is the P wave, pushing that last little bit, and that will top up the atrium. Okay, so the atrials will contract, topping up the ventricles. Okay, so the ventricles the atrium are contracting, ventricles are filling with blood. Then there is an isometric contraction. So that means that the ventricles are beginning to contract, and they contract from the bottom upwards because of the way the Purkinje fibers are. As it contracts upwards, it will close the valves between the atrium and the atrial ventricular valves, and that's what causes the first heart sound, the lub. Then it will completely pump out, and then in the relaxation of the ventricles, blood will have a little bit of backflow from the great vessels, and that's when you get the dub, the lub dub. So listen to the heart sounds here. And that's a normal heart sound. And if there's any variation from that normal heart sound, that means usually your valves aren't opening or closing properly. And just for a cool listen to these guys.
Everyone. In this video, we're going to release our heart sounds collection from the EMT Prep library. We've got about 15 to 20 seconds of each type of beat, and there's about 12 in total. Hope you enjoy.
Okay, just so you know, there's kind of two issues with valves. They either don't open properly or they don't close properly. Stenosis means it's thickening, so it doesn't open properly. And this is just so you hear the difference between normal and abnormal. I won't ask you what's causing them. And hopefully you could hear that. If not, these are on Blackboard, so go ahead and listen to them with earphones in them, and I mainly want you to realize that the lub, the strongest sound, comes from the strongest action, and the strongest action is the closing of the ventricles. So when you're closing the ventricles, you want blood to leave, so it will cause the contracting of the ventricles causes the closing of the atrial ventricular valves. Now, it's not a slamming of a door, but more of a backflow, like a sound of pulling, kind of like pulling a plug. It's the movement of the fluid, not the slamming of the valves. Okay? And so that is the strongest activity, and then when it relaxes, you have the less strong activity. Good, and that's when you hear your heart sounds. Now, when you consider your heart at work and how much activity you get out of your heart, it has to do with the beating of the heart. Now, the majority of your blood goes into the heart passively just by the fact that as it relaxes, it will fill up. But there is that extra little filling up. Now, there is, of course, an equation. I will never have you do the math, but I want you to know the interaction between them. So cardiac output is a result of the number of times your heart beats plus the stroke volume, or the volume that gets ejected with each heartbeat. So that makes sense. How much comes out times how many times it contracts, you get your stroke or your cardiac volume. So basically, your cardiac volume can be changed by changing your heart rate or changing your stroke volume. Now, usually if your heart races, it causes your stroke volume to decrease because there's less time for the ventricles to fill properly. So it's not always that clear that if you increase one, you increase the overall. Okay, a couple of words to go with heart rate. Normally, your heart rate, humans, is about 72 to 80 beats per minute. Babies or any small organism is faster. And two words that you will hear called on Grey's Anatomy quite a bit is bradycardia. Bradia is the slowing, and tachycardia, and tachy is faster. And I think it's tacky to drive fast, so that's how I relate tachycardia. Okay. Yeah, so that is the controlling cardiac output. Now, your autonomic nervous system will speed it up and slow it down. The speed it up is the sympathetic nervous system, because your body's sympathizing with it, and your parasympathetic will slow it down. So your vagus nerve slows it down, and your cardiac nerve will speed it up. Without going into too much detail, in your medulla oblongata is the cardiac center, and the cardiac center usually has to do with carbon dioxide amounts. So it will either cause it to accelerate, and that will affect the sympathetic nervous system, speeding up. And that cardiac nerve acts on the SA node, which of course speed things up. Then if you're going to slow things down, usually it's a rise in blood pressure will cause things to slow down. And the rising blood pressure is detected in your atrium, because you don't want your atrium to overstretch, and it will send the message to the medulla to say slow down, and that will cause the parasympathetic nervous system to act, and the vagus will slow it down. And these are acting on the SA and the AV nodes, and that's why the SA node is called the pacemaker. So when you look at it, you have a couple of receptors. You have chemoreceptors, and the chemoreceptors will detect the amount of oxygen. And you have baroreceptors, and baroreceptors are having to do with baroreceptors have to do with pressure. Where's number one? Okay. You got proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are in the muscle, and they will change based on physical activity, and they will signal your medulla oblongata. You have chemoreceptors. Now, in your aorta and your cardiac artery, this is where you want the most oxygen, because if it's coming out of your heart and going to your brain on low oxygen, you want to speed up your body to get more oxygen into it. So you do that by sending a message to your medulla oblongata. Now, chemoreceptors also detect carbon dioxide, and if there is a decrease in carbon dioxide, but that is detected in the medulla oblongata directly. If there's a decrease in the carbon dioxide, it will also speed up the heart rate. So heart rate is detected mainly by carbon dioxide, but indirectly by oxygen. Then there are baroreceptors, and baroreceptors are pressure receptors, and the pressure receptor is in your aortic arch and also in your lungs. The pressure receptors will detect if your blood pressure drops. And if your blood pressure drops, it will then send a signal to increase your heart rate, to increase your blood pressure. Okay? Good. The rest has to do with a lot of terminology in terms of heart failure. And that goes into a lot. There's a lot of wonderful lessons. Here's your vocabulary. Sorry, not wonderful lessons. A lot of, your heart is one of the first things that's affected by age and lack of activity. Good. And that is chapter 15. And the end. Okay. See you later.